the issues affecting Asia's animals, and the stories of the people working on their behalf. We'll be taking you on a tour of what's been happening lately in the animal protection space around Asia and also bringing you updates from our huge network of animal protection organizations and our many working groups. Welcome to the Asia for Animals podcast.
Hi everyone, my name is Cica, the lead coordinator of Asia for Animals Dog and Cat Coalition. Welcome to the second episode of our podcast series called Shelter Fatigue, where we'll be exploring issues that are related to the physical, emotional, and mental wear that affect shelter staff and even the animals themselves. Today we'll be talking all about decision making in rescues. If you've ever worked in a shelter before or have volunteered at a rescue center, you've probably wondered, how do we decide which animals to take in and which ones we don't? In reality, making that call is never easy. Intake is only one part of the picture. Once animals are inside the shelter, there's another layer of difficult choices, like how do we balance the quality of care with limited resources, or how to support the very people, like staff, vets, and volunteers, who are carrying all these weight of the responsibilities. That's why I'm very excited for this episode. I want you to welcome our guest for today, Henna Pekko from Rescue P.A.W.S Thailand. Henna has extensive on the ground experience in Thailand, and she'll be sharing her stories with us. Welcome, Henna.
Hi, and thank you so much for having me here today.
Yes, of course. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also what you do at Rescue P.A.W.S Thailand?
Yeah, so I'm the Managing Director of Rescue P.A.W.S Thailand, and we're an animal welfare organisation mainly trying to concentrate on sterilisation and preventative healthcare. But like any other NGO, we also deal with a lot of ill and injured animals and abandoned animals. So we do find homes for animals as well, and we also run an education program as part of our operations.
I see. So how long have you been in Rescue P.A.W.S Thailand?
About 6 years now.
6 years. That's a very long time. So in the span of those 6 years, Henna, have you ever faced situations like that in Rescue P.A.W.S Thailand where, you kept receiving reports of animals in needing of rescue, but Rescue P.A.W.S Thailand was almost or at full capacity?
I would say it's something that happens on daily basis. So it's not once in a blue moon. It is something that we deal with, I would say, every single day.
Yes, every single day, I can imagine. So, what kind of cases do you see often? Like, do you see, okay, like dogs and cats in the street, they don't have homes, or do you see more intense cases like, let's say, like accidents in the road or abuse cases? What do you see more often?
I think we're actually really lucky, touch wood, in that sense that we don't see a lot of intentional abuse cases. So if we do see animals that have they've lacked medical care, but I don't think it comes from a base of not being educated or having the resources to care for that animal. So luckily we're not in a situation where we see a lot of intentional kind of harm done to animals. So most of the cases that we do take in are, I would say, dog fights, so big wounds, and also a really big one is road traffic accidents.
So, amongst those cases, how do you make the decision, which dogs or cats to take in? Like, is there any criteria that the dogs or cats should meet to be rescued into the shelter?
Yes, there is, and there isn't. So, over the 6 years, I have tried to make really good protocols and kind of more black and white rules on what we can accept and what we cannot. But everything is so fluid in terms of like the capacity we have, the resources we have at that time, and also sometimes even if we don't have really the resources or capacity, we just, as because we're human beings and we see an animal suffering, we just can't turn them away. um, so is basically just triaging the animals as they come on the severity of the illness or injury that they have, and obviously assessing like how life threatening it is for the animal, and also a big component is pain, how painful it is for the animal. So if you have something that is extremely painful, um, we just can't turn them away. We have to give some sort of help, or have to do something about it. I feel like as a veterinary industry, that's our duty of care, to relieve pain. So it becomes very difficult to have very strict protocols, what we can and what we cannot, because obviously we're dealing with live beings that feel fear and pain, and it can be difficult to say that the budget says no and the kennel space says no. So how do you balance that? It's very difficult. And in addition to that as well, obviously it's not just me, it's the whole Rescue P.A.W.S team. And while we're talking about mental health as well, every decision that we make um, as an organization affects everyone else. So we have to also be making decisions that don't negatively affect the team and their mental health. So even that is an additional thing to consider.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that. I do agree with you about the fluidity of the cases, that it's not always black and white. And I'm sure that this happens a lot to shelters and individual rescuers as well. And for those who are not familiar with the term triage, it's usually a system that we use in the healthcare or medical field to categorize cases based on their severity. So we usually have like three categories. We usually use colors as well. So red, yellow, and green. So red indicates emergency cases, and then yellow or orange, we usually use that for urgent cases. And then green is like routine or cases that don't really require immediate action. So it's a very helpful system to be used in shelters as well when it comes to deciding if the animals should be taken in or not. And I absolutely agree with your second point about involving staff or shelter staff in your decision making process. I think it's very important. Usually, there will be one person deciding all that stuff, right? So, who is that decision maker in Rescue Paws Thailand?
I would say it's done together by myself and our lead veterinarian Cookie. So we always discuss a case, whether we have like what the animal needs, um, how their quality of life is going to be, do we have the resources, stuffing, and so it's a joint decision. And then obviously there's some cases where the whole staff comes in and everyone has their view on something. So I feel like we try to keep it an open discussion to hear everyone's thoughts and opinions, but ultimately it comes to down to myself and our lead vets.
That must be a lot of pressure for you.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I'm not a decision maker, but whenever I'm involved in the process, it makes me feel respected, right, as a staff. So, yeah, it's really good that you do that in Rescue Paws. I'm curious about one thing in Rescue Paws Thailand, where you're based in, or maybe in Thailand. Um, are Are there more dogs or cats in your shelter? So, or is it like balanced?
We definitely have more dogs. We do have cats as well, but definitely dogs outnumber the cats. That doesn't mean to say that we couldn't, in a day or two, put them in balance if we wanted to. So there is, I think cats are more, they hide a little bit more, dogs are more visible. So they can be easier to catch. They trust people in general more, so people can bring them in and start feeding them, whereas cats are a little bit elusive at that sense. But we do care for both cats and dogs.
I see. So, I'm also curious. So, does that play into the decision making process and also talking about their adoption rate as well? So, in my experience, dogs are more likely to be adopted than cats in the shelter. I have no idea why because I would take cats any day. That's just my personal take. But in my experience, of course, cats are less likely to be adopted. So it does take a little bit of factor in the decision making process. So we take more dogs than cats because we know that more dogs are gonna be adopted. But I don't know if that's the case in Rescue Paws Thailand. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It's actually the opposite. Cats tend to get adopted a lot faster, so we have a much higher turnover of cats. So we can have dogs in the shelter. We just had one that got adopted that she'd been with us for over 3 years, I believe, and she got adopted, which was amazing. But I don't think we've ever had a single cat more than a year. I would say less than a year. So the turnover is higher. Um, I think cats are easier to and Thai cats especially, they are quite friendly and talkative and independent. They're not like your Western cats. So they do make great companions, and they're easier to look after than a dog. That I feel like they're less of a commitment. You don't have to walk them and this and that. So cats do seem to go quicker.
I see. That's very interesting because in my case, people seem to like dogs more, even though I agree with you that cats are, well, this may be debatable, but they're less uh, high maintenance. So, yeah, but in my case, there are more people adopting dogs. And also, I think sometimes that certain types of cats they live better on the streets than in a shelter. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. So cats and dogs. So what we try to do at Rescue Paws is we don't want to be a massive shelter with thousands of animals. So we have about 40 at any given time. And that's because we want to be able to provide them all with a good quality of life. We want it to be as much of a home as possible. And I've really learned, and you learn from your mistakes, don't you? But you learn from the fact that not every animal can become a pet. I came here 6 years ago, probably with a quite Western view of things, and it has really it has really changed over the 6 years, and I understand now that not every street dog can be a pet, and even if you get them as a puppy, they for generations they've lived in the jungle, not had any contact with humans. So to keep an animal, whether a cat or a dog, in a shelter where it is scared and it will not ever learn to trust people, it's just not fair for the animal. It's much more kind and fair and better for the animal's welfare to release them back.
Yes, I so agree with that. And it doesn't mean that we're abandoning them.
No.
You usually you have shelter staff or even the community themselves. They're taking care of the dogs or cats, so it doesn't mean that we're abandoning them. But I think it's usually kinder for certain types of dogs or cats to live on the street than in a shelter.
Oh, 100%. And I think we've got over 40 packs that we currently feed. So, and that's just us. And there's, with Thailand, with the Buddhism as well, that plays a huge role in how street animals are treated. And I think a lot of the time there seems to be negative kind of press, which I don't feel like is justified to what I've seen and what I see every single day. So many people go out of their ways. We kind of call them like the little granny army. You can see in the evening times, like little grandmas on their sidecars. They got, barrels full of food to feed street dogs. And they do that out of their own pockets, out of their own kindness. So there's so many people out there caring for these animals. But the one thing lacking is the veterinary care. So if we can come and help fill that void, so do the parasite treatment, do the vaccines and sterilization, then that's the most ethical, humane solution. to try to, eventually tackle the problem.
Yes, I so agree with you on that. So moving on to the next question. What factors do you think like shelters or individual rescuers should consider before deciding to take in an animal? Like let's say other like seeing the capacity or the staff, funding, and also long-term well-being of the animals. So we've talked about shelters before, but what about individual rescuers? They might not have a lot of staff or funding. So what do you think they should consider before they take in animals?
I think the first point that I think is it's crucial is that if you run a shelter, whether you're an organization or a private person, and you haven't really educated yourself about what animals need, about the common diseases that we see, how they spread, what the ongoing prognosis for certain things is, you know, what extra care paralyzed dogs need. We often get it, people say, we'll get them a wheelchair. That doesn't solve the problem. That's 1% of what it takes to look after them. So really educating yourself around what each animal will require from you. So they don't just require food and shelter, they require parasite treatment, vaccines. If they get ill, they require veterinary care. So factoring all those in, and also even just starting from little things, making sure that you have enough funds for properly sanitize your sanctuary, so that you're using, just starting from those little things. Once again, it comes down to education, because if you're cramming a lot of dogs um, in a space that you're not properly cleaning, their welfare goes down because they are not healthy animals. So I'd say education is the first. And the way I always view when we take in an animal, I view it as that we're taking the animal for life. So you're not just factoring in, after 6 years, I know someone says, it's the cute puppy, it'll go straight away. It doesn't happen. Cute puppies can be here for 6 years. So I always need to think, for the next 6 years, do I have the space? Do I have the money to, provide all the veterinary care that they need? Do I have the staff to provide all the enrichment and exercise that they need? So it has to be a combination of all those factors.
Yeah, I think making an informed decision is important. So you need to think about all of those. And I think like starting with, funding and then thinking about if the animals is staying for how long in the shelter, I think that's very important. Speaking of the span of an animal's stay in the shelter, does Rescue Paws have any advice on how to increase adoption rate in the shelter?
We use a lot of social media, try to encourage adoption of street animals over buying pedigree animals. But it can be difficult, and I don't know how it is in Indonesia, but there's a different value for a pedigree animal versus a street animal. So it's very much trying to overcome them, or catch the people that don't have the difference between those animals, between a pedigree and then a soy dog that we have. But it's an uphill battle, I feel, and it's one of those really unpredictable ones. So we have some months that we can have 10 adoptions, and then we can have 2 months that we just don't have any. But it's just about engaging with the community, whether that's on social media, the wider community or the community over here. Um, but yeah, it is very tricky.
Yes, and I really relate to that. I mean, using social media is one thing, but using it the right way is another thing. So, I think what I can say a little about social media is that there's this algorithm and stuff like that that needs to be considered. So, I would usually take a really, really good picture of the dogs or cats being adopted, and then you kind of like sell those stories so that people will learn that adoption can be a very beautiful thing rather than just purchasing dogs and cats, and they're all the same. People say that shelter dogs or cats are untrained and they're different than purebred cats, and I think it's very wrong.
Absolutely. And I think they're exactly the same, but they come with a past. They come from a bit of struggle, and to a lot of people, and I would hope even more people, like giving them that second chance is so important and so rewarding for the adoptee as well, you know. Knowing the animal story, and also on social media, like you mentioned, what we try to do is build the animal's personality up. You know, all of them have different personalities. They all have their quirks, and you know, so try to get that personality shine through as well.
Yes, exactly. I think we have a lot of stories like that. Like some dogs, are friends with other dogs. Well, since the shelter that I work in, it's kind of like a sanctuary, so the dogs are kind of like roaming together. So they form all these like friendship and gangs, and I find that future adopters are very very interested in those stories. So shelters can use that as a way to um, let's say, advertise or improve the adoption rate in their shelters.
Yeah, 100%.
And speaking of adoption again, so in Rescue Paws Thailand, how would the process of adoption be? So, like, can a future adopters pick their own dogs or cats, or can you walk us a little bit about the adoption process?
Yeah, so we do both local and international adoptions, and um, the process behind that is pretty much still similar. So what we try to do is, because we know the animals' personalities, right? So we try to, it's kind of blind dating. So we try to match the right animal with the right family, and sometimes that can take a little persuasion. So you could have a really, really energetic dog, and maybe a family that's not so active, or you can have, um, super sporty family, and then they really want this dog that wants nothing more than to lay on the sofa and just go for a little 5 minute stroll. So it's kind of matching the wants of the family and then the animal's needs, and then figuring out which animals would be a good fit. And obviously we require that that they can provide everything for the animals. So future veterinary care, they have enough space, enough exercise, all those basic things. Because we do have a large expat community here as well, so we require that we explain and require that if they are to leave the country, that they must take the animal with them, and we go through the process. And the fact that it does take a lot of time, it does take a fair bit of patience, and it does take a little bit of money. But to leave the animal behind is not really an option, because also that is one of those things that happen here a lot, is that people say, I unexpectedly have to leave, and now can someone take my 5 dogs in? So it's a story that we don't want any of our adopted animals to be part of.
Yes, you don't want to put those animals through something similar that, the reason why they were taken in the shelter in the first place. So, yeah, do you have any policy about, like if the adopter and the animals they don't match? Because, you never know, right? When adopters and animals sometimes they match in the shelter, but the animal doesn't match within the environment of their homes. So, for example, let's say an adopter is calling you and then saying, "Hey, it turns out my cat doesn't really like my dogs." Like, do you have any policy about something like that?
Yes, yeah. So we do, for all our adoptions. Well, with the international ones, it's a bit more tricky, but we do have a 2 week kind of trial period, so that people can see if it is a good fit. Like I said, people have personalities and animals have personalities, so it needs to match. So we do give a 2 week trial period for all of that.
Yes. I think having a trial period is important, and I find that not every shelters have that. And uh, I think it's important to inform the adopter about this policy because when they find that the animals don't match them or the environment, it doesn't mean that you should abandon the animals. You can actually communicate and talk to the shelter that you're adopting from because it doesn't always strictly mean, oh, you always have to take them like forever, like they're stuck with you forever. I mean, shelters are actually open to matching you with another animals if you'd still like to adopt another one. So yeah, I think it's important to have that communication with your shelter, and also for shelters it's important to have that communication with your adopters.
Yeah, 100%. And also, we keep in contact with our adopters. So if there's any issues, we can help guide through them. If there's any, especially if it's puppies, usually toilet training them and things like that. So all those things can be quite frustrating. So, we're there to help them through the process as well. Um, so we want to guide and help people. And if it's still not a good fit, then obviously they can bring the animal back because, um, first of all, it's not fair for the animal to be in that environment or for the people if they're not both happy. And then, in another sense, we wouldn't want to turn them away so that they'll just end up back on the street.
Yes, of course. Yeah, so as you all can see, that running a shelter is really emotionally and mentally draining. So I think it's the rescuing and the adoption, they're all a very, very complicated process. And for those individual rescuers who are thinking of starting their own shelters, I think these are all the factors that you need to consider before starting a shelter or a foundation. I'm curious, like, are there any resources in Thailand or any facilities that can help people working with animals when they're struggling with this? Like when they're struggling, or they have like some mental health issues that are actually caused by facilitating shelters or working in shelters. Does Thailand have that specific facility?
Unfortunately, not. Mental health care, kind of like access to mental health help in Thailand, that can be quite tricky and limited. So even for the wider population, I think it can be quite tricky to access. Um, yeah, so it can be quite challenging over here to get help for mental health struggles. But I think sometimes as well, I think it would be what is needed is kind of more collaboration between organizations and private individuals having shelters, because there sometimes seems to be competition, that we're in competition with each other. But in truth, we're not. We're all working towards the same thing. And, if you're not in this industry, explaining like, I'm sure if you described your day yesterday at the shelter, I can relate to it. But if you talk to, an accountant or a lawyer, they would be astonished by the things that you saw or had to feel or witness. Um, you know, um, so having that kind of peer-to-peer platform, where you can reach out, or even if you're struggling with something or you haven't seen a certain kind of situation before, just have that group of people that you could, ask advice for. So we don't have anything kind of set up in Thailand for that. Um, but we've been lucky enough. I've got good contacts with other organizations, like big organizations in Thailand, like Soy Dogs and Happy Doggo. And, if we've had um, things that I've needed help with, because obviously they must have gone through it before, or maybe they dealt with it in a different way. So it's been really nice to ask other people in the same profession how they dealt with the situation, or do you have a protocol for this, or have you ever come across this before? But I do think that more kind of ground ground level where people can just have access to a forum or something like that, just to share their experiences and even maybe just to let it all out sometimes, that would be really, really beneficial,
Yes, of course. I mean, even in veterinary medicine, right? We rely on each other, as colleagues to help each other with anything that we're facing at work. So it's the same with shelters as well. I think it's important to set aside our ego for a little bit and help each other out whenever we need help, because well, in most countries in Southeast Asia, we don't really have that specific resources or facilities, right, that we can rely on. So we tend to, lean on each other for support, for mental health support, or like even support as in, can you help me with, the adoption advices, or I don't know, advices on taking in animals. So yeah, I think it's very important about leaning on each other for that.
And I think this may be a little bit off the point, but I do think there's a misconception and a kind of narrative both in rescue work and also in veterinary work, um, that because it's a caring profession and it's about animals, that it's almost that you shouldn't get nothing for it. So, or that you should be happy to endure it, or that it's seen as a very positive thing if you are, like, even because social media, it can be, like you said, it can be great or it can be really, really damaging. But also often, what goes viral is people saying that they're stretched too thin, or that they work for 14 hours every single day for 2 years now, or they kind of really reinforcing that stereotype of overworking, having all these, seeing all these horrible things day to day, and then kind of glorifying it because the person viewing that only sees it for a few seconds, but the person living it is living in it. And I feel like that narrative would be good to change. Same even with veterinarians working in commercial clinics, they often hear, like, it sounds like you're in it for the money, or, well, aren't you doing it because you care for animals? Of course, they're there because they care for animals, but that isn't the driving force. I think the public wants to see someone who's struggling, or someone's giving everything to help the animals. And often we do, but it shouldn't be encouraged. It can be, I'm sure, a lot of your time is centered around animals. You wake up, you're already thinking about it, do your work, and then you come back home and you think about the cases or what you could have done different, or so it already is that. We shouldn't glorify that, I feel.
Yes.
But it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one to try to explain, but there's this kind of like Mother Teresa complex that that is viewed as a really positive, but it's not good for the individuals. And if all rescuers around the world are trying to do that and be this person who sacrifices and sacrifices, it really builds an unhealthy image.
Yes, I cannot agree with you more. And I'm really, really glad to hear that, even as a vet and also as a shelter staff, I think it's really, really great to hear that. And I feel like the situation has changed a little bit over the years, right? I think it's a lot better now, but I still see a lot of that glorified things that shouldn't even be considered as normal, that you're working 24/7, and then seeing as oh, like, you're a shelter staff, you're a vet, that you have to do all of that for the animals and you shouldn't get paid for it. But in reality, we're people with families and with needs, so we actually need money to take care of those things in our lives. So yeah, I think it's really relieving to hear that as a vet and also as a shelter staff. So thank you, Henna, for that.
And I think it's very deep rooted as well. Because, like I said, I've been here 6 years, and when I tell our visitors that, or volunteers, they often ask me, "Oh, so you volunteer?" no, I can't volunteer for 6 years. That's not financially feasible.
Yeah, of course, imagine. But I mean, there are some volunteers, right, doing this for their whole life. I mean, I can't imagine it myself, but there are people like that, and some things need to be changed in the field of like shelter and animal healthcare. That people should be able to work. People should be able to be paid for their jobs. Even if we're taking of animals, we love animals, but we still deserve to be paid for that.
Yeah. I think that just the fact no one would say to an accountant, but you're passionate about this, don't expect to get paid. But they do that, that's the common, the kind of narrative when it comes to, I think, a lot of caring professions as well, but especially when you work with animals. Um, yeah, it's really hard work. It's really, and I think the fact that we are passionate about it and caring, that's a good and a bad thing. That's good for the profession and that's good for the animals, but it's probably not good for us. As individuals, it's not, because you come home, you don't just clock out and thought, I'll start again tomorrow. You think about every case. You think, how did the adoption go? Or you think, was it the correct decision that I didn't accept this animal? So you live with those thoughts all day long. You don't switch off. And maybe some people know how to do that, and if we can build this community where people can talk and tell me how to switch off and stop, then I think it'll be great. But the compassion and the drive and the enthusiasm, it shouldn't weigh us down, and I think a lot of the times it does. And that's why a lot of um, vetting, because I'm my background's in vet nursing, so I've been in the industry for a good 15 years. um, So that's why we see such high dropout rates from both veterinarians and veterinary nurses as well, because that is because of that root problem, I think.
Yeah, of course. It's like we said, leaning on each other for support, and please don't feel any shame or any hesitation in talking to each other, because I think just letting it out is very important. And and also remember that you're not alone in this field of rescuing animals, sheltering animals, and also animal healthcare vets and veterinary nurses. You're not alone, and I would like to encourage everyone to communicate with each other, connect with each other, and you can. If you're based in Thailand, of course, you can reach out to Henna or Rescue P.A.W.S Thailand. And if you're based in Asia, of course, you can always reach out to us, Asia for Animals, and we have a lot of resources that can help you make your job easier in the shelter or in your rescue. So, yeah, thank you so much, Henna, for your insights today. Henna, do you have any closing statement to end our session for today?
Thank you so much for doing a podcast on this. I think it is a very, very important subject to touch on, and to make sure that we will have people working on this profession for years to come. And I do think we need, and if we can have, we need people to be able to reach out and, like you said, come together and put our egos aside, because we're all going through the same thing, we're all feeling the same things. Just having it, knowing that there's a massive community of us worldwide going through the same things, even on its own, that's kind of comforting or reassuring. But to be able to share stories or share experiences, um, if in the future we can have something that would connect everyone, that would be fantastic. But that's just my dream.
Okay, thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you again to our listeners. If you have any questions or topics that you'd like us to cover in the future episode of Shelter Fatigue, feel free to reach out to Asia for Animals through AFA's social media channels. And don't forget to tune in to other Asia for Animals podcast episodes. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can find everything you need to know about our work and connect with us at asiaforanimals.com. Tune in for the next episode. Asia for Animals Coalition, a united voice for Asia's animals.